All right, let's get into this because this documentary is fascinating. Now, it's behind a paywall, so but it's well worth. I have no problem saying and encouraging. It's well worth the $4.99 rental. Um, but I first read about the documentary here because, admittedly, I am now and soon to be, as soon as they post it, a contributor to this website, Propaganda in Focus, which is, in fact, I'll just show you real quick here. It's, I think, a source people should start to add to their media diet that is not a peer-reviewed journal per se, but a lot of well-sourced, well-written, and substantive essays, articles, think pieces, etc., from the academic world that studies as a primary focus propaganda. So this group that I'm a part of, Organization for Propaganda Studies, is a contributing member to this effort here as well. So there's a lot of stuff here, and admittedly, it does not come, I think, particularly from our worldviews for this platform per se. I don't pretend to agree politically with everything and everybody that contributes, but in terms of an academic study, as far as the academic study of propaganda goes, there's a lot of strong contributors involved and a lot of powerful information. So I just encourage people to check it out in general. And this was the story that I ended up reading now, because I've just, as I said, it's not peer reviewed per se, but there is an editing process, thankfully. And I've been just wrapping up my own for that essay on cryptoganda and Black capitalism, which I'm excited to have pop up here any day now. So I'll invite people to read it and critique it, and we can come back and discuss it later. But I found this piece and thought, wow, this is fascinating. So a new documentary called Theaters of War. I've put a link in the show description to both the trailer and where you can go to rent or buy, I think, the documentary. But just a little bit here from Daniel Espinoza, who writes here: decades of movie award ceremonies and other celebrations of the seventh art could easily fool us into thinking that the film industry is and always was mostly about culture and entertainment. The U.S. military establishment and political elite, on the other hand, quickly recognized its potential not for improving human society, but for controlling it better. In that sense, and as Roger Stahl reminds us in the new documentary Theaters of War, there's hardly a point in recent history when the military branch of the U.S. government and Hollywood were not decisively intertwined. What Professor Stahl, the Department of Communication Studies, University of Georgia, uncovers for us in his 88 minutes long documentary is the depth of this relationship, traditionally veiled, but not exactly secret. He does so not only with the help of documents obtained by a small group of researchers using the Freedom of Information Act, but also by actively debunking the work of military industrial complex gatekeepers. These gatekeepers, like military historian and film critic Lawrence Suede, were fairly successful in whitewashing the Pentagon's influence over Hollywood by circumscribing it to a need for accuracy and realism. Sadly, that worked out until the turn of this century, when researchers such as David Robb, author of the 2004 book Operation Hollywood, started to get into the subject, and Suede halted it. The depth of the collaboration between the entertainment industry and the U.S. military and its many branches, and later in the documentary, also the CIA, is hinted at the first minutes of Theaters of War, when we learn how the Pentagon plays the role of a powerful film producer. Its operators in Hollywood review scripts, weave in key talking points, pitch original projects to film and TV studios, and more importantly, hold a de facto veto over film ideas that fail to live up to their PR demands. So what I like about this documentary most is that finally by talking by taking all this recently acquired knowledge from the highly specialized field of propaganda research and putting it in cinematic format, Roger Stahl and his production team have created a documentary with an outstanding potential for reaching the same masses of people targeted by the Pentagon's marriage of convenience with Hollywood and educational achievement for Professor Stahl and his crew. So, and that for me is where I ultimately come down on being excited about it and wanting to recommend this documentary, because for anyone who has studied this particular history and read the work of Alfred and Secker that I've referenced and talk a lot about, or Rob himself, Operation Hollywood, going back to 2004, or anything like that, the documentary isn't offering something new or groundbreaking. What it does is, in a very well-produced, perfect for the classroom, perfect even for like family stuff, because it's a very entertaining, high quality documentary. It sort of organizes a lot of that work and presents it in a way that, for those who are frankly not going to do the reading, or don't want to take the time, or just passing by the subject, it does a good job. So I just want to share a little bit of some of the highlights that I saw and took note of, and then encourage people to check it out. Again, it comes from the Media Education Foundation, MEF. They've done a lot of great work. And of course, I've interviewed early, and I should put in the link in the show description, one of its leading figures, Professor Sut Jali. So please do, check that out at some point as well. But yeah, let me pull these screenshots up. Again, I'm not trying to mess up anything copywritten, and I don't want to in any way discourage people from supporting the film. So I just have a couple screenshots that I think capture a good amount of what I would want to talk about and encourage you all to see more about. So of course, just from the very beginning, it talks a lot about the again, that sort of symbiotic and incestuous relationship between the military and Hollywood. And they're very explicit that Hollywood needs, rather the Pentagon needs Hollywood to help with recruitment and with imposing a pro-US imperial propagandized message for the world to see. So to recruit membership into the military and to support the US military interests and goals abroad. That's what their involvement is all about. Hollywood, from their perspective, filmmakers, never mind their political leanings and desire to support that endeavor, they want access to all the bells and whistles, all the toys, all the ships, the planes, etc., and so forth. So the documentary shows, like they show you some of the documents that have been released. And by the way, what they were talking about there was that, and Rob talks about this in his book, Operation Hollywood, and I think in the documentary of the same title, they talk about this, but he initially gets access to that database that Swede was using to aid the Pentagon in promoting itself in the world. But when Rob started using that access to that database to show the world just how propagandized US films are, Rob was cut off from that database. So what Alfred and Secker and others have been doing, and Rob have been doing for all these years, is getting more FOIA requests. So a lot of this documentary is talking about how Alfred and Secker got these freedom of information requests for years. In one case, I think they said they had to wait 8 years for the CIA to respond to one of the requests and send the documents. So aside from all the concerns about, as they acknowledge, that they rightfully approach these documents with skepticism, given that they are coming from the FBI, the CIA, etc., Not the yeah, the FBI and the CIA and the Defense Department primarily, but but uh, uh, but even then, it took a while to get everything or to get what they got, and not everything as you see here was unredacted. Just another a shot of the documents that they look at. So in this one here, you even see in the upper corner here a handwritten. Let's see, can I even? I don't want to mess this up. I feel like I'm on the edge here, and anything is going to mess it up. But you see in this upper corner, the handwritten note says no shooting down of plane killing unless in self-defense. So in other words, for whatever this film was, and I can't remember exactly which one it was, the Pentagon notes are telling the filmmakers, don't show any aggression coming from the US unless it's in self-defense, because again, they want to promote this idea that the US is a good actor, a positive actor in the world. So if you want shots like this in your film and this in your film, you know, and this is again, you know, I admit, I still admit a certain reaction to seeing what was my home, or something like what was my home for 4 years, well, 3 years and change. But that's an aircraft carrier in a battle group. If you want that kind of shot, if you want that kind of thing in your movie, you got to have the Navy supporting your film. So they, you know, if you want your Black Hawks flying and your F-14s or whatever these are, you gotta come with it. And then, as the documentary shows, they break down what you got to do. So this is a note that they got in a FOIA request showing that the military, the Defense Department, explicitly understands that with films like Lone Survivor, they're not just imposing a pro-US message onto the world, but they're intending it to be something that will recruit. And as it says, from their perspective, support of entertainment feature films gives them far greater gives them reach to far greater audiences than any single news media story about the actual events. So even as you hear in this documentary, where the film Lone Survivor, which is said to depict the true story of the U.S. soldier portrayed by Mark Wahlberg, who the one SEAL team member to survive this excursion in Afghanistan, they redo the actual history, which involved the lieutenant or whatever in charge contemplating killing everybody, burying the Afghan citizens they come across. They have a debate or a discussion, and they consider killing them, burying the bodies, and keeping it moving. They just and they decide not to. This was and the extent to which they were. I think there was some of that in the film. Anyway, I forgot the details, but that's why you got to see the documentary. The documentary it explains what was and was not allowed to be in the film, because from the perspective of the Pentagon, they're saying we get far greater recruitment capability from a film than any story about the actual event. So if we have to fictionalize something, so be it. Same thing. So it says like audience going to see the film will voluntarily sit through an hour-long infomercial or a 2-hour-long infomercial about participation of Army Special Forces. And you know, so they're looking at it as an infomercial. They're looking at films as recruitment tools. And they use the same kind of language you find in traditional communication studies and the history about and the role that that film has played in U.S. society in particular. Which is why, again, when people say you're doing too much, Jared, and it's just entertainment, they're missing the point. That from their perspective, and this is, I keep coming back to this, from the perspective of power, the fact that they can call it entertainment and many people will dismiss it as entertainment makes the propaganda more effective. So here's a shot where you see Michael Bay sitting with Phil Strub of the Department of Defense during a military screening of Transformers 2. Strub is the guy that Rob and others have been writing about for a long time, he's the one that goes over the scripts. So if you want access to all the military stuff, he reads the scripts. And Michael Bay is seen here in this scene. You know, he's basically saying, he jokes about having access to the Pentagon and wanting. And then they get into this whole thing about how the Pentagon has intentionally used sci-fi films like Transformers and others to again, in the guise of entertainment and science fiction, put in very non-fictional propaganda messaging into the film. And here's just an example. They talk about the films that were denied support by the Pentagon because the stories they were telling were too real. And it's interesting because and I didn't know this, but well, I'll leave that for the documentary. There's some very interesting things about who was offered what film and what films they've ended up doing and what films got shelved and what films got highly promoted. But anyway, you see, these are films that did get made and did come out, but they had to use lower budgeted military knockoffs or come up with some other solution to be done. These are other films that were denied support, but were still made. And then they have a section in the documentary that talks about how a lot of other films weren't made at all. And then they talk about, why some of these films were denied. So what was shown in these films that I know for a fact, because I read Operation Hollywood, that Forrest Gump was denied support because they didn't want the very real truth of the intentional use of low IQ soldiers for the front lines to be depicted in the film, as was the case with Forrest and Bubba, who of course is killed. That was one of the reasons why that film didn't get support. But it's interesting to see what films do and don't get support from the military and why. And this documentary does an interesting job of covering that. Here are some of the things that will get you denied. If you show the U.S. losing wars or losing control of nuclear weapons, like in that film Broken Arrow, which is the actual term, they even use it on our ship for the loss of control of a nuclear item. But they don't want to support that. Anything with any military incompetence or war crimes and drug trafficking, they don't want you to. And then in particular, down at the bottom there, you see they don't want anything that talks about institutional racism. So again, this is why when I talk about, and please go, if you haven't watched that one too, watch the 2 videos we did on E3 and below, the My Navy film that will never get made. Or would not get made with military Pentagon support, because they don't want to talk about institutional racism. And they have a nice section in this documentary that covers that and some other issues as well, but that cover that one in particular, and say, look, the racism is in this one character. We're going to make it all about this one character. The same thing that I talk about all the time with, like what they did with the Judas. And Judas and the Messiah, they made the racism in the Black Messiah. They made the racism in the FBI all about Hoover and not the rest of the institution itself, or something to that effect. Well, this is an overt talking point in Defense Department work, and that's what they call a showstopper. These are what they call showstoppers. So all of these things that the military has long been involved in, if alcoholism and drug abuse, my goodness, no film depicting the Navy, I won't speak to any other branch, but no film depicting the Navy that doesn't depict massive alcohol abuse and drug abuse and even drug trafficking is I know for a fact fraudulent as a film. But anyway, that's a showstopper. Here's a document that they got that was interesting. A memorandum for the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. That there are numerous problems with this is why the film Platoon, Oliver Stone's film, was denied, because they have a nice section in this documentary that talks about, well, you would think that filmmakers like Oliver Stone, who have enlisted in the military and gone to war, would be given, a red carpet, so to speak, in making films about their war experience. Well, the exact opposite is true. If the more realism, as was the case with Platoon, the less likely the Pentagon is going to support it. And if you've ever seen Platoon, where there's drug use and they show, as it says here, murder and rape of innocent Vietnamese, all of which has been, well depicted and demonstrated to have occurred, it doesn't work. It says here, like it even says in the memo here, the stereotyping of Black soldiers and the portrayal of the majority of soldiers as illiterate and delinquents. So they're saying, we don't want you to depict that, even though it's not because it's not real. It's because we don't want the military to be seen as targeting the most oppressed, the most intellectually deficient from the perspective of the test givers, etc. We don't want to be seen targeting them. This is one of my favorite parts, where Phil Strub is heard in this interview with Lawrence Swede. So again, Swede was the author of this book, Guts and Glory, or Guts and Glory, which was a very pro-military, pro-Pentagon discussion of what we're discussing. And he's the guy that cut off Rob, the author of Operation Hollywood, once he realized he was using access to this military Hollywood database to expose what was really happening. So they play a clip from an interview between I don't know how they got it, between Swede and Strub, and in the section where they were talking about the Tuskegee Airmen film with Lawrence Fishburne, they were talking about what films they did and did not support, and they said, yeah, we gave big time support to Tuskegee Airmen. They loved that film. And why? Because it allows for Black soldiers to be depicted and only having to deal with racism in the caricature of one senator, not the military itself. That was one part that the documentary talks about. I don't remember the rest of the film, but the point is, from my perspective at least, this is again why, not only when it comes to military films, but all depiction of Black and other oppressed groups, there should be wild suspicion, especially when we like it. That's what I'm talking about with the Vernon philosophy, because from their perspective, they're getting something from it. Big time support for the Tuskegee Airmen film. Same thing when they're talking about Captain Marvel and Brie Larson and support for women in the Air Force, and how from the Air Force's perspective, it was a big deal that she was in the Air Force. And they play a clip from Brie Larson doing like a PSA for the Air Force, where she's saying, like, to her character, the Air Force was essential. It was everything about this superhero, Captain Marvel. Same thing with Jennifer Gardner and her show Alias. You see her in a pro CIA PSA. So again, it's not just entertainment, or put differently, for the targets, it's intended to be seen as just entertainment. From the producers and supporters of the propaganda, it's intended to do work, whether it's recruitment, whether it's giving justification for U.S. imperialism, whether it's to get U.S. citizens to support this ridiculous and ever increasing military budget, whatever. And of course, again, the reverse connection, the parallel of what Malcolm has always said about the police doing locally what the military does internationally. Well, that's the same thing. It's meant to trickle down. So if the CIA is doing the good work of the U.S. overseas, the FBI and the local police are doing that same good thing here. Right. And this was the document where they're talking about how in the Tuskegee Airmen, they said, make the center, this is from the Defense Department. They're saying to fix the problem with the film, make sure that the senator, the one senator played by John Lithgow, is the source of the bigotry, not the military. The idea that one senator would have more influence and impact over the army itself is absurd, but that's what they want. That was at least one of the things that they want. In fact, and they talk about in the documentary how look at all the there's so many points that were talked. There was a scene where a fight breaks out between the black airmen and the white airmen, and they took that out of the film because they didn't want to show racism within the ranks of the military. And again, this is a film about the Tuskegee Airmen, even in the late 1990s when I was in the military. I'm sorry, the late 1980s, early 1990s. Wow. Don't get it. That's how long it's been. Since the late 80s, early 90s, since I was in the military, I've never been around that much overt racism than in those 3 to 4 years. So the idea, but that can't be in the movie. That can't be in the movie. That can't be in the movie because then it's less likely to be a propaganda tool. The use of dogs was taken out of the screenplay. What did I? Wow, I don't even remember what my note is for that. My bad. Oh, this was okay. This is all right. I forgot which film this was for, but this is again the Defense Department saying they don't want to be seen hurting animals, and they don't want to be seen as engaging in any. I forgot what EIT stands for, but they don't want to be seen as engaging in any illegal activity or use of chemical biological weapons that isn't already out there in the public. So you can't be exposing new military nightmares to so for instance in one of the films about the Second World War and the US fighting in the Pacific Islands, all of the racism that led to white soldiers taking human body parts as trophies. So for instance, and we definitely got to come back and talk about this, we got to talk about the new film Prey, the new Predator film Prey. In that movie, there's a scene where you see the Predator melting a wolf's head, pouring, dissolvent or some whatever over an acid over wolf's head so that it dissolves the flesh and leaves only the skull. Well, you can put that in a Predator alien if you want, but white military soldiers in the Second World War were doing that all throughout the Pacific. Like you can put it all on the Nazis and what they did to Jews with lampshades, skin, and all that other nasty stuff the Nazis did. But their compatriots in the U.S. military were doing the exact same thing to the people they encountered in the Pacific. And the Defense Department didn't say it wasn't true. They just said we can't put the stealing gold teeth and all that other stuff and the melting of the flesh and taking skulls home. They get into this in the documentary. Like people were like skulls of dead victims became like household ornaments after the Second World War. But they don't want that in a movie because you're less likely. You're like, wow, am I being asked to join that? No, because you're not going to see that in the film. Then the filmmaker gets his question answered during a webinar convened by the director with DoD support of the film Fury and the director with DoD support the film Lone Survivor, and Dennis Moynihan, the former Admiral Dennis Moynihan, the former Navy Chief of Information, one of the highest ranking people in the Navy and in the entire military. And they're asked about how do you deal with, they actually read the question from the director of theaters of war, which was, how do you deal with war crimes in your films? Like, how do how do you address that? And Moynihan just hems and haws and struggles through some non-answer that basically just says, we just want the truth, and he says we want to give the best portrayal of the military. So because as the film points out, the military is not denying that they use film for these purposes. And that's something I meant to highlight at the beginning of even this discussion. I don't think I did it well enough. They're not denying what they're doing. They just don't want it discussed, obviously. They're not saying we're not doing it. There's too much evidence that they do it. And they have offices. They have a liaison office in Hollywood. They have a Pentagon office in a Hollywood office in the Pentagon. Like they acknowledge this. They just don't really want to discuss it. But when it comes up, they're like, yeah, we want to look good in the military. We want the military. We need this stuff to make us look good. So I haven't watched this. I watched some of the first season, was just turned off by sometimes it's just too much. Sometimes I can get into these things. I'm not gonna front. Sometimes they're good, just for, sometimes they go too far. They do too much and it just becomes too obvious. So I never even got to the second season, but apparently in the second season of this Jack Ryan thing, my man from The Office, that's another reason I could honestly, good luck to the John Krasinski or whatever. He got all buff and whatever for the film, but I'm like, you still what's his name? I can't remember his name, but you still, what's your name from The Office? You know what I'm saying? You still playing tricks on Dwight in The Office. But what they do here is they have, like, they've made Venezuela the enemy, like overtly Venezuela, as you see depicted here with the flag, everything on this guy that they've captured. Like, Venezuela is the enemy, trying to, like, they've like taken stuff from Russia to attack the, and then this documentary does a perfect job in showing Jack Ryan depicts a democratically elected Venezuelan leader who the U.S. doesn't like and wants to replace, albeit with a woman in this case, a democratic liberal supported by the United States. And as the documentary points out, this is obviously what just happened with with them trying to put Guaido in there. So they just made her a woman in Jack Ryan. And then they, and this guy who obviously, just comes out the other day saying, I know how to coup. I know how to do coup. I do coups. Up there backing Guaido, the unelected U.S.-backed guy. So listen, so that's it, really. That's it. This is the cover of the documentary. It's linked in the show notes. Please check it out. I deeply highly encourage people get this, watch it in groups, have discussions of it, use it in their classrooms, as I intend to this semester, and tap back into that Vernon philosophy of Black media avoidance, because the better it is, the more likely we are supposed to be critical of it. So, and absolutely, Obi, this is again why I've been big on the woke imperium piece. That we, this is how they do it. Like, you want some feminism? You want some, and they show in the documentary, the woman portraying this woman uses in one of her interviews this thing about, it's I'm portraying a strong, powerful female character, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I do cool. That's what he was saying. Old Bolty Bolton. Old Bolty. Right, that's right. I does this. That's right. That's right. And actually, A Few Good Men was not supported by the Pentagon. Now, obviously, because they don't want to have a depiction of Marines killing Marines who are weak, that's not going to go over well for recruitment drives. But yeah, they had to make that film without support. because even that was too much. And then they, of course, talk about how this latest Top Gun film has just blown the roof off of, pun intended, of recruitment. Its recruitment has already gone up. People, it is doing everything that they want done. I'm sure to some extent there has been unconscious, if not conscious, acceptance of U.S. imperialism as a result of that film elsewhere in the world. But they're very happy with that thing. That's funny. Oh, absolutely. 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 One of I had a student a few years ago who had his mind. Again, we're going to be talking to Olufemi Taiwo in a couple of weeks about his book, Elite Capture. But I had a student who was captured by the elite. And I'm intending for that interview, by the way, to be an extension of the one he did with Black Myths podcast. But this brother was captured by the elite and was an Ayn Rand fan and was being supported in that endeavor by a former dean of ours. Madness. Black folks running around talking about Ayn Rand is useful. Unbelievable. Yeah. I have seen The Gray Man. Definitely found it interesting. Yeah, it's the same. It wasn't done particularly well, I don't think, but it was, it was all right. I mean, but it was just another, another Jason Bourne CIA type assassins thing where the assassins kill the assassins and all that. I'm not sure the CIA would have supported that film, and I don't think this documentary talks about the Bourne series. That would be interesting to look into. I don't remember them being that coming up. That's right. Chavez lives. That's right. But anyway, so I'm going to leave it there. Listen, come back tomorrow morning. We have a packed show, some great new work forthcoming that we're going to talk about with Dr. Orasami Burton, and then FD Signifier. Or FD Signifier. I don't know if you got a very popular YouTube channel. Is going to join us in the second hour tomorrow morning. Looking forward to that as well. A little bit of a change up for us here, but it should be interesting and fun. So definitely check that out. And please do check out this Theater of War and stay tuned for my piece dropping soon on Propaganda in Focus, Cryptoganda, rebranding Black capitalism. Definitely. And thank you very much for joining me for this relatively short discussion. Support everything else coming up on the channel. Warrior class on earlier today. I'll be on tomorrow morning and the remix all week. And with that, like Fred Hampton used to say, to you we say peace only if you're willing to fight for it. Peace, everybody. I mix what I like.